Hello and welcome to John and James Live. My name is John Hastings and I'm with the main man, Mr. James C. Lowe. How are you today, James?
I'm good. How are you, mate?
Not too bad. Not too bad. So we're deciding what we're going to talk about this week, and I've gone for post-capitalism. I think people, everywhere on LinkedIn, I'm getting the vibe that small businesses, there's things are getting tricky. The government are bringing tax reforms out. Everything's becoming more expensive. Immigration's on the agenda. Big things are happening in the world. And I think this is potentially the post-capitalism arrival, or an impending post-capitalism, or the wheels are kind of coming off this system that we've got going on at the moment, James. So we would say
like
capitalism.
This is a stepping off point.
I think so. I think it's a natural evolution of a way of organizing society. So if we say it as sort of capitalism is a system of market exchange driven by profit, underpinned by sort of property rights and labor, I would start to think that with technology, things are changing. There becomes a few contradictions within the capitalist movement ideology.
Shall I just give you a very quick definition of what post-capitalism refers to?
Yeah, go for it, James.
Would that be useful?
I think it would be lovely, James.
I think
let's do that.
That would be rather nice, wouldn't it?
Let's try not make this too technical, because there's a lot of technical terms in this whole
and I'm not technical at all. Yeah, but it's so basically in a nutshell, what comes after capitalism. So it's a sort of society that can emerge after, like you were saying, the sort of with technology, this kind of democratization, decentralization. I think that's fundamentally the key. And, kind of where we are at the moment with private ownership and wage crisis, etc., that it's unsustainable. I think you kind of mentioned that and what's going to evolve as a result of where we are kind of right now. And seemingly it's not kind of, you can't define it as a singular term. It's got lots of different elements to it that it can't really be sort of boiled down to one particular element. I think there's lots of aspects to it, lots of facets, and it's an umbrella term, I guess.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah. Let's be completely clear that this is not an ideological standing on one side or the other. Just because you say something about capitalism, it doesn't mean you're a communist or you advocate for socialism. There's a lot of there's a lot of complexities in even the word capitalism. It's evolved. Is it what they call neoliberalism? Is it some sort of techno feudalism? There's a lot of isms, and it becomes quite highbrow. And I think sometimes there's a lot of ego within the, I would say, intellectual world of sounding smart because you want to sort of get the one up on somebody else. But let's look at the realizations of where we're at. It's been a phenomenal 100 years in terms of change. It's been insane. Can you imagine that we've gone from a horse to like flying rockets to Mars, and then we've got sanitation, the science. I was just watching like an NHS program yesterday, and it just showed the equipment with all of the MRI scanning and like the doctors, surgeons all using robotics and AI. And I'm thinking, could you imagine 150 years ago there was no anesthetic?
Yeah.
You'd have like a bar in your mouth and just like alcohol or like some type of early form of morphine, and then we've come to this.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you think about the ridicule, I forget the name of the guy who introduced hand washing prior to
That was right.
Doing surgery. And the likes of Lister, etc., and how much ridicule he got for saying you should wash your hands before conducting. And then to where we are now. But it does feel like transitions previously took a long time to come into general practice. And now with technology, the acceleration of it. So when you think about how far we've come in 100 years,
that
will be quadrupled through technology now. So that evolution in a century is now happening in sort of 5 or 10 years. The speed.
And then you got to try not to conflate innovation with a capitalist system. I don't know if they're separate or it's a correlation or causation in that sense, because I'm thinking, maybe you could have had the same type of innovation, or we will have the same innovation under a different type of system. Because when let's say when you're innovating and you build a car, then somewhere along that line there's got to be mass exploitation, hasn't there? Somebody, millions of people, 10 million people died in the or murdered in the Congo just 100 years ago for rubber. But people that are innovating in the West, they're not really putting the puzzle together to think, okay, this innovation's on the back of a mass exploitation. That's not going to work
human cost
otherwise. Or even us just being on this live using our computer screens. We know deep down that all of this technology is made from precious metals from third world countries. Who knows what the conditions are when it comes to building this technology that we're utilizing. And we're basically living off the back of most business, even it's a closed business, it's a brand business, you're living off the back of the globalization or third world exploitation, aren't you? You got all your factories abroad because it's super cheap. The iPhone's made in China in these factories where people are working like 16 hours a day. It's all of the African mining companies. God knows how that's being made. Every time you have a cup of coffee, we know that some farmer in some third world has made that in Colombia or
and then coupled with greenwashing as well, that we're being told that this is ethical, that those farmers are being looked after, and we don't know that. We don't know that at all. We have no idea whether they are, or maybe they're just fractionally better off as a result of being part of that cooperative than necessarily they would have been. So it's an interesting. I don't know that we ever will get into a situation where there's zero impact somewhere. The ripples are wide and cover a large area for sure, and impact a lot of people.
I think, James, the foundation probably, if we remove the ethical side, then we could probably say, based in a human psychology, it would be in sort of scarcity and fear. And for most of history, they're very legitimate feelings. There was scarcity. We didn't understand maybe the science or the capabilities to control our environment with high levels of predictability. So that, that's going to enforce fear, scarcity of a survival mechanism. And I think that's just still, that's very much still part of our system today, isn't it? It's very fear, scarcity based. But we've sort of reached a tipping point where we can create mass abundance. And now it's become sort of mass confusion. It's like, okay, we could have factories in this country making clothes. Who cares what the brand is, really? That's just like you could have a competition with some of the best designers around and just create like some type of socialist brand. Who would really care that much?
But that sort of ties into the impact of AI technologies are having on the workforce, where there's jobs that existed or roles that existed that no longer exist. And, design, you can get a design within seconds. So you don't need necessarily, and it's interesting then when you start to look at what that post-capitalist society looks like, how it's represented in respect of the jobs, the roles that people have, their senses of identity, because the job that you do defines you or can define you as an individual. And now you're in a situation where those particular jobs don't exist anymore. So there's a redefinition. And then in terms of status within society, what you do, how that then defines your status. Yeah. Because there's certain menialities or certain jobs that will have to exist that AI cannot do, will get redefined as a result. And then maybe, the remuneration for that particular job is increased as a result because there is scarcity, or there is, this situation where before it was maybe overlooked and ignored or undervalued, now becomes of value. So I think there's a sort of a concentration, this reordering of the world that potentially will exist, and a rethinking, and whether it depends on how quickly it happens as to how it's received and approached. Because if it's quick, there's going to be a shock factor to it, that there's going to be an adjustment. But if it's over a period of time, maybe there'll be a natural integration, and that people can acclimatize themselves to it. But my sense is it's going to happen quite quickly. It's already happening, for sure.
It's definitely already happening. You're seeing it all over LinkedIn, aren't you? You're seeing it with small businesses where people are starting to think about, okay, what do I do next? How does the future look? How are these tools going to impact me? How am I going to survive? And I think that's some of the aspects of, people talk about the flourishing of capitalism, of bringing people out of poverty. But we've also got to look at the flip side in terms of people's physical health. Obesity levels across the West have never been higher. People's psychological health. Yeah. I would say the family unit, in terms of, mum, dads, children. People are having, in the West, a lot less children. We would say that families are a lot more fragmented. The pressure on relationships is now quite heavy. And we've pretty much commoditized every touch point of a human interaction, James. So, instead of community and family, we may have a therapist, and it's a paid, commodified interaction, but you're not really getting love there. Have your personal trainer, your commoditized connection with paying to watch entertainment on TV or go to a football match. You've commoditized interaction at pretty much every single touch point, I would say, which is
what's your sense? I mean, there's this thing about this kind of universal, I think it's called universal basic income, or it's like that sort of the base layer for people to earn an amount or to receive an amount. So for cost of living. So if everybody gets that base, and then, you can make it above, but it's a survival, I guess, amount of income that it's an eradication of poverty, that nobody is below the poverty line. What's your sense of that, and how that could work, be implemented, what the implications of that are in terms of GDP and, this post it's that sort of the consumption element of what we actually need to consume, and then what can be divvied out fairly, so that there's not that sort of, you know, fear of poverty and basically being homeless.
Yeah, we definitely got a few issues, I would say. You know, a lot of it underpinned by, you know, property ownership. Somebody's got to live somewhere. Access to food is definitely a thing. Energy, transport, education. Those are sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs right at the bottom. We're going to have an issue with. I think as a system, I think I would say from, you know, sort of researching, studying people like Peter Joseph, who would say that it's market psychology that is a main problem. Whereas, you know, if you tackle problems on a first principles basis, then your idea is to actually solve the problem. But with market psychology, if you solve the problem, then the business disappears. So you've either got to keep evolving the business, or you manage symptoms and you proliferate the business model. So reoccurring revenue, cyclical consumption is the way forward, and on an infinite growth model. But I would say that's pretty much sort of head in sand thinking, because if you replicated what's happened in the last 30-40 years with house prices, then how much is your 1-bedroom 2-bedroom house going to be in the next 30 years? Is it going to be £2 million? And when you compare that to actual income, and you see the disparity in income rises to house prices, then we've got a real it's an unsustainable problem. And then you move to things like we've got Gary Stevenson saying the idea is to tax the rich, or you've got the universal basic income option as well that they're trialing. And what I think with those, James, I don't think any of those options really get to the core of what Peter Joseph would talk about in terms of market psychology. I think they will actually be a plaster on a problem, but they will be an inevitable plaster that, because of the contradictions of capitalism and technological unemployment, where these tech machines can
do, and the nature of
consumerism
as well. I think it's so hardwired. You know, we've got centuries of consumerism being part of our everyday existence.
Yeah, it's not that old though, James. If you think, even, I don't know if you watched that program Selfridges. Have you ever watched the Selfridges?
Yeah, I think I have.
The old one. Well, you can start to see there, early 1900s, that, you know, they're really starting to push the idea of consumerism past, you know, leading up to World War II and post World War II, with the amount of ability to create in terms of factories. It was a sort of an artificial scarcity and demand model, wasn't it, after that?
Well, I suppose I'm talking about the desire to have, you know, the desire to have the ability to be able to, you know, to purchase. And again, it's a status thing. It was, you know, the chattels, and, you know, it's hardwired into human nature for certain, you know, individuals to desire these sort of things. And that's, you know, the marketing, advertising companies, the way in which, like we've talked about Bernays, haven't we? And how society was influenced by this kind of
Freudian, this Freudian psychological manipulation of you know, scarcity models and keeping up with the Joneses, that type of thing. So Paveen says the truth is you can give money to those below poverty level, but you can't control what they spend said money on. If it was vouchers to pay for heat, food, etc., it would be better. I think that's not a bad shout, Paveen. I've thought about that before, where you, in this sort of universal basic income, it would be good if you can't carry the money over. I've tried to think about how you would do it. Say you have an allowance of £1,000 a week, but you can't save that £1,000. it always just goes back to, you can't pass it on, you can't save it. It just always goes back to £1,000. So you then stop this hoarding, buy and sell type of
I mean, who ultimately decides that? You know, are we sort of talking about a nanny state that people fundamentally in certain economic, are we saying that, you know, people who are below the poverty line, who are living in, you know, economic crisis, can't be trusted to spend money, or if they were given an amount of money to spend it, and who's to define what sensibly is, who's to define what sustainably is, that if you're then sort of saying, well, it was only going to be on a sort of a voucher system because you can't be trusted. I think, you know, a lot of it societally has to do with, you know, self-esteem, how you value yourself, how you value your contribution in society, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and a lot of people, again, are generationally kept down from, you know, parents to children to their children to their children, historically have been, you know, living in deprivation. And in terms of their aspiration, they would say, well, you know, our grandparents lived this way, our parents lived this way, this is all we know, we don't know anything differently. So, you know, we've got to, again, be careful about making all sorts of assumptions of how, you know, people, I've done it, and I'm sure many, many people have done it, walk past somebody homeless on the street and not given them money because the assumption is they would go and spend it on alcohol or drugs or whatever. You know, so you'd rather give them some warm clothing or a duvet or something. I've done it. I went to Sainsbury's a couple of years ago, and I went in and I bought a duvet for a lad that was sat outside, you know, in the cold, rather than give him money. So, you know, we none of us are impervious. We're
yeah.
But I think there's something fundamentally flawed in the thinking that people cannot be trusted. That if they were given the basic, you know, and I know there's universal credits, and, you know, what we have at the moment, that then comes with its own criteria that people have to prove that they're actively looking for work, et cetera, et cetera. Then you've got the PIP system, and that's flawed. You know, people being evaluated, and the people that should receive it aren't, and the people that shouldn't necessarily receive it are. There's always these individual cases. So, and there are systems and societies where people are getting sufficient and they are respecting what they're getting. And it's just kind of almost human decency and common courtesy to provide everybody with a basic living standard. And you think of the inequality and you think of the gap between the haves and the have-nots, that if that could be reduced somewhat. But as I said, I think it's about, you know, self-worth, value, more so than, you know, the act of giving money and what they would then do with it. It's everything that kind of comes with it is my own personal view.
Although I do like Paveen's, I do like that idea. I have thought about that idea quite a bit. Yeah, I like the idea of maybe having like a 2,500 calorie allowance. It comes through an app. It just restarts at 2,500 every 24 hours type of thing. You can't move it on, and then you get access to, you know, a really high standard living accommodation. If you want to play the capitalist game, I'm talking short term, then you can go on and have your own, you know, type of thing. But I do like Paveen's idea of having it not necessarily, because sometimes choice is not a good thing, James. I think it can be crippling for the best of us. Paveen says, consumerism is fed by companies like Amazon, which makes everything available at the click of a button. We did not have the access to borrowed funds, credit cards, and all of the things that we can buy now. Before, we had to wait for Christmas or birthdays to get those special things now.
Yeah, and again, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, you hear stories of McDonald's being sued because of making people obese. Well,
yeah.
Again, it's that thing. It's like you either go to McDonald's or you don't go to McDonald's. So,
yeah,
you know, the
even
same
the
thing
idea
is
of
like
Christmas, James, isn't it? The hijacking of Father Christmas to do with consumerism and Coca-Cola.
And again, you know, you've got to factor in, and absolutely, I take Paveen's point. You know, that the ease in which I was listening to some ads for, you know, online betting, and the irony of saying, you know, sort of bet responsibly or drink responsibly for alcohol, and you think, well, you know, they're putting in these kind of tick boxes and saying, look, you can set yourself a limit and you can put a time on there and say that, you know, that's it, you're done. But it's like, you know, if you've got a gambling problem, or if you're an alcoholic, then, you know, those things don't occur to you. You know, that they're there as a safeguard, sure, and there are, you know, governing bodies that have to say that these things got to be in place. But the reality is, you know, how effective are they? So, you know, it's really, and I don't know how realistic this is to get to the root of the problem in terms of how people feel about themselves, their sense of worth in society, and the value. And if that can be improved, if the standard of living could be improved, then a lot of things could then come off the back of that. That if you're constantly on the back foot, you can't get a break. You can't, you know, and you just think, well, what's the point? And I feel shit about myself. I don't particularly like myself generally. So, you know, whatever I do, it doesn't really matter. It's that sense of self and self-worth, that if there's something that can be done to improve that, or to make people feel valued, and that there's maybe hope in whatever form that takes, then potentially, you know, we can have the self-worth and the self-trust to be able to act accordingly. You know,
and I don't think
in
that's
self-sabotage mode.
I agree, James, on that one, but I don't think that necessarily equates to it just being about money, because how many people that have got successful businesses or are doing okay or have got a normal job who feel
money isn't necessarily the answer. I mean, certainly it helps. I mean, let's not, you know, say that money doesn't make you happy, because
it helps you breathe.
You know, in terms of survival, it's key. It's fundamental. But it's so much. I totally agree. It's so much wider than that. You can't just isolate that and say that that's the sticking, or the fix. It's so much more nuanced than that. But I think, again, as I said, it comes down to sort of self-worth, what contribution you pay, or, you know, the value that you have generally, is to, you know, what you would do. And talking of addictions, we all know that comes out of trying to fill a void that you can never fill.
And these, and I see what Paveen's saying here. I've known so many people who live at the poverty level, yet they have the fanciest TVs, new phones, and smoke, living paycheck to paycheck. And I completely agree with this, Paveen, but I don't think that behavior comes in a vacuum. I think this is, if you go to any of the impoverished areas in London, you will see the same shops, casinos, Betfred, you know, vapes, alcohol. You're going to see it.
It's all symptomatic.
All of the TV advertising is going to be targeted at a certain demographic. And then what's happening is these people are living on top of riches, and then it's status driven, and they think to themselves, I don't even care anymore. I want to sedate. I want this. I can. And then you got banks that
it's escapism. I mean, the fancy TVs, you know, the car parked outside a shitty 1-bedroom flat, you know, it's like
payday loans. How many times have we seen that on adverts? About get yourself a payday loan. At the bottom it says like 10 million% APR, and you know, people don't even know what that means.
And we know that, you know, marketing is predicated on how it makes you feel at that moment in time. It's like, this is going to improve your life. This is going to make you, when you get up in the morning, you switch on that TV and you've got fantastic 4K or, whatever HD you've got there. This is going to make your life feel so much better. That's it. That's consumerism. That's human nature.
Yeah. I do think some of these people, I get what Praveen's saying there, but people on maybe benefits or these type of people are highlighted in society and seen in a negative light. I'm from, a council estate. I've seen what it's like on there. I understand that the demographic. I don't really judge them in that way, because I know that, somewhere along the line higher up, some guy is selling weapons, millions of people are dying, and that person's seen as a success because they've made millions of pounds. And then they're buying paintings for 100 million and stuff that you would think is absolutely useless, made by people that have been exploited in third world countries. But observationally, you would see the person who's smoking has hardly got any money with just a £1,000 TV as worse than that person. So I wouldn't make any judgments on that.
And again, we've said it time and time again in previous podcasts. It's like, there's always exceptions to the rule. There's always people there that are hell bent on abusing the system. And, but again, it's the reasons why. And these people exist for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's not, again, it's so easy to categorize and say, well, they are those type of people but they don't exist in a vacuum. There's a reason why that there are people that do those things. They are in the minority, but there's a reason why they don't have respect for certain things. So, it's
complicated, isn't it, James?
It's hugely complicated.
Yeah, because you sort of pitch it against somebody who has the mentality of saying, this is a meritocracy. If I work hard and I deserve this, I've worked for it, I deserve it. And there's elements of truth in everything, but in reality, at the top, there's also, people are born into certain situations. Some people are very good at leverage when it comes to the game of capitalism or business, and they will make decisions potentially that are not ethical or morally what another person would do, but it makes them a lot of money. It's like there was a podcast guest on one of the Diary of a CEO podcast this week, and they was talking about ethics and doing the right thing and being a character of winning. But the business partner of that person was advocating for people who have got no money. Said, if you got $1,000 left in the bank, should you buy my 997 course if Christmas is around the corner and you've got nothing? And they're like, yeah, you should definitely buy my course, even if it's the last penny you got, even if you have to take credit cards to buy it. Maybe they're right. Maybe if you take that course, you're going to become you're going to elevate yourself out of that. But statistically, how many people who take a course are going to be like that person? I would say 99% of the time, it's not going to work.
And again, it's that thing. I take that course, I'm going to become that person.
Yeah.
I buy that device, it's going to make me more organized.
But how ethical is that, James? That person is winning in the material world. The person who's selling and using those type of tactics in the material world, you can't say they're not doing well. Private jets, endless amounts of money, endless amounts of resources, probably respect in a lot of sense. So
and again, they're a human being, just whatever their morals are, whatever the compass is, You know, they've got potentially a family that are reliant on them. And it's like, you know, you could just say it's dog eat dog, isn't it? That at the end of the day, it's macro and microeconomics of survival. And, you know, they're going to do what they need to survive.
Yeah. They're playing the game, aren't they?
And collateral damage is, you know, the people that, you know, are buying these courses thinking that that's going to change their lives, potentially. And
he says, I once read A Fine Balance by Robinto Mystery. It was about two men and a woman who struggled their whole life. And each time they achieved that goal, they would want more. It's sort of like what Trump is doing in America, the worst of capitalism. Yeah, it's a difficult time. I think there's a lot of, you know, old mentality coming into friction with new technology, which is completely natural. If you've got power and you've acquired, then I can imagine it's natural. It's going to elevate your fear, and you're going to want to hold on to it. You're going to want to stabilize change. You want to control the change. You want to be in charge of that. So I can understand that's going to happen. But I just think, James, when we're talking about post-capitalism, I think at the moment, if we think about 100 years time, 200 years time, it's inevitable that we'll look back on these times and think, this is primitive.
Yeah.
What we're doing now is primitive. What we know is primitive. How we act, how we set up housing, how we think about business, how we think about markets. It's going to, it would be irrational to think that we won't look back and think it's primitive. So it's just knowing that now.
We're already there in respect of, you know, countries like China. I mean, how far Singapore have come in a very, very short period of time. I mean, they were really struggling, let's say sort of 50, 60 years ago, and have accelerated their economy through doing the sort of the basics.
Part of the British Empire. Have you been to Singapore, James?
I haven't been to Singapore, but yeah, part of the British Empire.
Part of the British Empire.
And since you know, getting independence, I mean, like astonishing. I mean, it took a hard line, but
I don't know I don't know what sort of inequality levels are there. I'm sure it's not great.
Yeah,
I'm very much sure it's not great.
When you look at, you know, how other economies are doing and the way in which things are set up, I mean, we don't have widespread at the moment sort of these autonomous stores that you can walk into with it completely free of any staff. I think probably London have got some,
we've
but certainly
got Amazon shops, Lidl shops that are like pretty much people free,
totally staff free. So that, you know, scan you as you come in, and then obviously you pick an item up, and that automatically gets. So, you know, when you kind of look back and think, well, we've gone from like a shop where you would have to ask the shopkeeper, nothing would be out on display. You'd have to go and ask the shopkeeper for what you needed. He would then go and get it from the back room, to where we are now. And that's, you know, that's been a development in the last sort of 100 years in terms of, you know, that sort of consumerism.
Yeah. Fridges are new. Fridges is very new technology. That just wasn't around. It was basically like salt holes under the ground to preserve food. So everything that we think of is like in cement within our society. Everything is mind-bogglingly new.
Yeah, I mean, I've had periods in my life when I'm sort of, and this is off topic, but like it's not, of listening to music and going, music can't get any better than this. This is so now, this music I'm listening to, and then a couple of years later you listen to it again and go, God, that sounds just so dated now. And like the new music that you're listening to now, it's like, well, how can it develop any more than where we are now? But it does. And we go through these cycles. Sure, we go kind of back in time and then forwards, and you always kind of draw on those sort of things. But I think you're absolutely right that we're going to look at now inequality and again, we come back to democratization of the control over our money and not being beholden to banks, for example. I mean, obviously, cryptocurrency is a massive indicator as where that's potentially going.
Yeah.
Of this decentralized element. That, you know, it's going to be unrecognizable. And whether that then gets distributed is another matter. You know, when you're talking about smart contracts and the way in which, you know, people are interacting with each other, you're taking out the third parties, that two individuals can create something between the two of them. And it's a seamless flow, this transition of transfer of whatever the currency is, that you're not then having to pay a third party, or that they're not taking the cut, that it goes direct from one individual to the other. You know, those things
creates a lot of monopolies, though, doesn't it? That if you just, you know, technology gets rid of middlemen.
I mean, certainly it can do, but then you think, well, you know, if it's two individuals like you and I, for example, wanted to do a transaction, and we could do that, we wouldn't have to involve anybody else.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The middleman gets wiped out somewhere.
Yeah.
Then it'll be like a certain, you know, a number of tech giants that pretty much run everything. I would say. Paveen said, "I've been to Singapore, and there's a lot of people who live at poverty level. Wages are a lot lower." I concur with that, Paveen. I've been to Singapore. Ironically, I had a multi-millionaire client who sent me there, who took me on a business trip there with 30 of his employees for free and gave me spending money. And I ate at all the best restaurants, stayed at the Shangri-La Hotel, and it was phenomenal. But on the bus trips between me living the high life, I did see people obviously living not so good. So definitely I've seen that as well, Paveen. I just got back from Japan, China and Korea. It's all about consumerism there.
Wow, Paveen.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. That sounds amazing. I got my cousins out in Japan at the moment as well. So I'm not really too. I've been to Thailand, but I've not been to those places. But I'm not surprised. Are you, James? In this consumerism thing, I think it's. I'm seeing it as a bit of an undiagnosed cancer. I don't know what level that cancer is yet. I think it's probably level 3 to 4.
Yeah.
With 4 being the most aggressive. It just infiltrates everything, doesn't it?
I mean, there's no two ways about it. I mean, credit is an interesting one. Is that if you had a wad of notes in your pocket and that's all you had, and once that runs out, that's it. Your thought process is very, very different than if you can click on an app on your phone and do that transaction. The consideration is poles apart. You know, if you have a finite amount of money and that's it, and once that's gone, it's gone, then your decision making is very, very different to if you can just double click on your phone and make a spontaneous purchase.
The devil's advocate on that, though, James, you're betting on the future with sort of investment in technology. You couldn't save up to build a technology company. You would have to have credit, which is of your bet on the future.
I'm not saying all credit. I'm just saying that, you know, when you had cash as a means of, or a check was slightly different, because again, that was, you're writing numbers on a piece of paper and then handing that over. But like when we paid for everything in cash, when that ran out.
Yeah. But I guess the biggest credit product that's been in the last 50 years is the mortgage. it is probably underpinned credit, isn't it? It's you don't really own, you're paying interest on credit for your own house. So you sort of believe you own it. But if you stop paying the mortgage,
you don't own it.
You don't own it. And plus, if you pay, say, 200, your house is 200,000. By the time you get to that end of that mortgage, you've probably paid 500,000.
Yeah.
So you're not paying 200,000 for the property, are you? So it's a bit of a hoodwink, the mortgage. It became a product of sort of financialization that people just accepted. And that's where I think, like what Paveen was saying earlier, where people would save up for things and do things. Well, how many people do we know that bought property for? We know so many people. Then you say, how much you buy it for? 4 grand. Yeah, their wages weren't as much as they are today, but it was no way the multiples what it is now.
Yeah,
it might have been a multiple of 2 or 3 or 4. Now it's like multiples of 50 in terms of more than what your wages are. To get, and when people feel there's no hope, I guess, for the next generation, that's when people do become reckless and they think, oh, I just don't care. I can't afford a property. I can't afford this. I'm just
interestingly, when I bought my first flat, or when S and I bought our first flats, 44,900, and I was on 7,000 a year. She was earning as well, but she was probably maybe 4,000 or 5,000 a year.
So say you had combined income of say 12, then you're gonna multiple of 3.5.
And that was doable then.
Yeah. So you'd think the average wage now is probably say 30 grand. So you had 60 and you had 3.5. So you'd still got to buy in London. You'll be buying a house of 120, 130, 40.
Which doesn't exist.
You're not going to get a garden shed.
No, it doesn't exist. And within probably 2 years, that 44 went up to 72, I think. So we were on the cusp. We were on as the wave was rising.
Yeah.
We were at that point where we could ride that wave. We were lucky.
And that's where we got to decouple, like we was saying before, James, about the idea of working hard, because there is that working class, middle class thing, as if you work hard, you deserve something. Whereas wealthy people think about, working smart, owning assets. It's more a game, and then the asset value goes up, and then you get the interest, and then money's making money. You're making investments. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's sort of a spiral that spirals upwards. And like what Gary Stevenson talks about on his podcast, the Gary's Economics, it's always funneling upwards. His thing is to tax the rich. I think that's again, probably like UBI, is going to be a short-term plaster on real deep issues. But I think people can feel it, James. I think even if you're a middle-class person and you've got your, you've got your property, you've got your life, I think if you really dug down in most people, when you ask them about their actual job, what they're doing, maybe they haven't thought about it that much. Let's say you're working in, I don't know, a marketing agency or something. It seems, and then you think about what are you actually doing? Yeah. It would be quite painful for people to unravel, and that's why in this day and age things are taken so seriously, like professional sport. I would say, let's take football. Football didn't have the popularity. Football in its concept is still relatively new. It's only like 100 years old. People assume these things have been going on forever, but it's not that old. In terms of its commercial popularity now, it's very new. But now it's replaced connection in society. It's like a religion. It's like the new church. But when you think of it fundamentally, it's a ball
and boil it down to its most basic thing is, you know,
people are fighting for this,
running after what used to be a pig's bladder.
24/7 analysis, millions of pounds. It's sort of like modern day gladiators. Maybe it's bread and circuses.
Well, that's an interesting
for them
thing in terms of what jobs can be replaced by AI. That nobody's going to pay to watch a load of robots playing football.
James, I don't know about that, sir, because I think that's already happening. Esports is apparently the biggest thing
that's different
ever.
That is different.
I don't think it is, James. This is people watching people playing
in a live arena where, you know, it's that kind of thing. You know, there's unpredictability. And yes, you can build unpredictability into, you know, robots or, you know, humanoids, whatever. But I certainly, okay, well, you can never say never.
Yeah.
But I can perceive in the next 10, 15 years, I can't see people paying good money to go watch a humanoid play football or to do a sporting event, knowing that this is a robot.
I'm surprised that people will watch other people play computer games.
I kind of am, and I'm not. I'm not.
This is huge.
Having kids that have played, and I guess they have an understanding of the skill involved and the hours of practice it takes to get good at this, and therein lies. But it's still a human playing. You know, these are not AI generated content. There's not two AIs playing against each other. You know, you've got the commentary and you've got, you know, there's still that human element involved, even though it's being taking place in a virtual world. There's still
but you're playing against sort of NPCs, and they non-player something controllers. So you are playing against computers.
But there's still the human involvement.
Still human involvement, but I guess I wouldn't say never, but I understand what you mean in terms of the football side.
I think certainly the short term.
But even football, James, when you talk about live football, it's not accessible for most people. Who can afford to take their family of, you know, say you got two boys and you want to take your wife with you, 4 people to a football match with food, tickets, you're going to be spending £500 to £1,000.
Well, I'm going to watch England, New Zealand at Twickenham on Saturday, and I think I got a bit of a deal, but that was over 200 quid. It's about 203 quid.
So in reality, that's not accessible for a lot of people, is it? That type of live entertainment, and I think that's going to be an issue moving forwards. But again, if you think about, James, post-capitalism, how is it gonna work? What would be the answer to this? For my view, I've always thought about this advanced living standard. So instead of universal basic income, you have sort of an advanced living standard where it's pretty much open access. So you can have your capitalism on top of competition, but you have a baseline where, like Paveen said, you have an app where you can get 2,500 calories per day. You can have access to some type of, pod hotel. So you have like a really high level living quarters where you'll never be homeless. Free access to the internet and access to education. And then I see us building from this real baseline, high level baseline, and then opening up to exploration and creativity.
Yeah, things become seemingly more efficient, whether we have more leisure time. So like shorter work weeks, for example, that can be spent, quality time with the family, for example. That's utopia, isn't it? If you're not spending sort of 70, 80 hours a week working, that if it was a shorter work week, because things have become so much more efficient, and it would be a situation where, you still would need to have that level of input, but it wouldn't be so time intensive, that you'd like to think there would be more leisure time and more quality time. Whether that's the case, whether, because things have become more efficient, that actually then the workload becomes more. I mean, it's very much like during the pandemic, people started working from home. They didn't have an hour or 2 hours commute to and from the office. They were at home, they were online, meeting after meeting after meeting. And it slowly sort of seemed to evolve that people were reporting that the workload increased, the expectations increased because they weren't having to commute. There wasn't that sort of downtime. And they almost sort of missed that because it would allow them to prepare before they got to the office and allow them to decompress before they got home. Whereas working from home, there wasn't that anymore. So,
no switch off.
Taking that as an example, you think, well, actually, if things do become more efficient, then maybe, again, the expectation level increases. So it's all proportionate. So whether that will be the case, that actually you will have to enforce cutoffs, that, the system will be set up that actually you can't work past a certain time, that is being, set, and that there's an entity that will dictate that, to say that come 5 o'clock on a Thursday, that's it. And then you have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then maybe come back into work midday Monday, for example, because, everything's become sort of compressed. Who knows, mate? Who knows? But there's obviously going to be people that will take advantage of that. And it's whether legislation comes in to actually say, this is now the case, that we have done a study, we've had a think tank, and decided that actually spending more time with the people you love is going to make you more productive. And, these are the leisure times that are available to you. These are the facilities that we put on. And everything's very much kind of like, well, chunked. Here you go. This is what you're going to eat today. This is your exercise time. This is your meditation time. And we're all kind of like boxed into these situations where that is now mandatory. It could be utopia, it could be dystopia, depending on your perspective, isn't it?
I don't know how that's going to really, that one will play out. Definitely in the short term, it could be an option, wouldn't it? Mandatory break times. But some people might say they love their job. They don't want to switch off.
Well, again, look at China. I mean, factories in China, they are, before they start work, they will do some form of movement, whether it's Tai Chi or it's meditation or they sing or do whatever. And then they're into their workday. So it's all, but that's a compliant, dare I say it, a more compliant society. That has been generationally introduced, and it wouldn't necessarily work.
I don't think that's going to go down well in the West, is it?
No.
We're living like that.
Again, we don't know, do we? We can look back and in 20 years' time and say, well, bloody hell, we had that conversation. There's no way that society is going to subscribe to that. But look where we are. We are in a situation where it's costing the NHS billions in terms of healthcare. That was unsustainable. We're living longer. The money had to come from somewhere, and there had to be an intervention.
And like we said before, Jay, the money might not be it might be a red herring, the money, and free time might be also a red herring, because if you look at like professional football players, when they retire, the divorce rate is like 70%. So they've got so much time, but they haven't got any direction.
Yeah.
And they don't know what they're doing. They've got so much time at home, which is not good. So
what I would
eager for a purpose.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you look at the digital space of control, you know, that if we are in a situation where our identities are all digitized, and with identities, we can get access to certain things. So, you know, obviously we've got passports now, but if we had like a citizen's card or something that was digitized, and there were conditions on that, you know, that you couldn't get access to certain things if you don't comply to certain things, you know, whether that be vaccinations or, you know, contribution, childcare, etc., that at the moment we have a level of autonomy in respect of, you know, the diktats. But if it came to a situation where everything was digitized and at the press of a button, you could be prevented from going anywhere or paying for something, for example, or there were punitive restrictions because you hadn't done certain things, you hadn't complied.
Yeah.
You know, that's
I can see that happening. I can see that happening in the short term. I definitely think that it probably will happen in the short term, where it could be like the sort of China credit point system. Again, if you did have that sort of universally advanced standard of living as a baseline, I think that then when it comes to the sort of capitalist type model, at the moment, people are, what would you say, 90% of people are coerced into working for money is their primary objective. Whereas if you had a very high standard of baseline living and you started a business, it would have to be, to pull people into work, you would have to be quite purpose-led in my mind. So you would have to create something quite valuable that's solving a real problem where people really want to be part of this work journey, happy to work hard, be part of that. It won't be a coercion based on the need for money, which completely changes the psychology of work. And I think that will come.
Where's the motivation come from? And as you said, it would be reliant on, you know, the ethos, you know, of actually creating something good. But then what happens? But maybe there is a natural order of this. There's this kind of natural selection that the mundanity, the stuff that really doesn't matter, becomes obsolete anyway. It's the purpose-led organizations, you know, I mean, the environment will have a massive part to play in respect of, you know, the health of the planet. So if you're an organization being set up now that can come up with sort of carbon capture or, you know, ozone layer or, you know, whatever we need to do to help this planet survive, should get priority in respect of, you know, but you think about that as a motivating factor. You think this is survival. I mean, there's nothing more important. You know, everything else pales into insignificance if the planet dies. So it's in terms of, you know, what is the priority and what is mission led, and, you know, what is the motivation if it isn't monetary, you know, for the general good and the continuation of the species.
I think you're right, James. I think for me, the future potential is so exciting. I don't know if it's going to be seen out in my lifetime, but, you know, just exploration of the universe, more understanding, more creativity, those type of things are going to be so powerful. Plus, you've got obviously the survival side longer term with the sun blowing up and us needing to be a sort of interplanetary species. We sort of have to think about that. I know it's going to be millions of years away, but we have to think about that in the future, don't we?
We do.
You want to read this one out, James? Joseph.
Yeah.
Who are you, Joseph?
Portelli.
Where are you read this one, James?
I will read this one. Paveen, Andrew, that's because the luxuries of yesterday have come down in price significantly compared to previous decades. Simultaneously, necessities such as housing and food have shot through the roof, making saving pointless, and luxury is the only thing left to alleviate the grim existence.
That's a good point, Joseph, because there's a generation that is sort of on top of the youth of today saying, look, you're wasting your money on £4 or £5 Starbucks, you know, you should save up your money. Where in reality, you could save up 1 million Starbucks and you're never going to be able to, after you've paid your rent, your chances of, you know, even getting a house in certain places are going to be relatively slim. We got to acknowledge that the times have changed. I don't think it's easier for the new generation. I don't think it's good to compare generations. Each one of them had their difficulties and hardships, and I can't imagine how difficult it is for a young person nowadays. People assume it's easy. It's definitely not. Infinite choice, infinite stability, constant change, disconnection, loneliness, infinite possibility, which could just boil your brain, can't it, to be honest? So it's I think I understand what Paveen's saying, and there's definitely truth in that. I definitely get what Joseph is saying on that one, because some of our fundamental needs, like we said, the sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just having some shelter, food, have become so expensive, and then we're coerced into working services.
It's an interesting concept, and again, we're sort of getting off topic a bit, but going back to what you're saying, it's like the amount of diagnoses of ADHD, and you think how prevalent that is now, and you then ask the question is like, well, is it only because it wasn't recognized previously that people that had it were just deemed to be disruptive, or, you know, kids being with ADD, just naughty kids, or prior to that, dyslexia. When I was at school, you didn't know what dyslexia was. It didn't have the term. So kids that struggled at school were just called thick or dunces or whatever. So we didn't have the terminology. So it's a question around whether, you know, these things exist again in a vacuum, that it's just because there's a greater awareness that there's more diagnosis, or it's symptomatic of where we are in respect of, you know, social media, the internet, the multitude of choice, as you said. And this has come as a result of that situation that we're in. You know, I don't have statistics, I don't have the research, but my gut would say that there's a little bit of both. But I would say the main factor would be where we are in respect of society, the disconnect, the multitude of choice, that we're seeing this, you know, on a 24/7 basis. There's no escape from it, the comparison. And has created this situation where, you know, we are struggling to maintain focus on one particular thing.
Yeah, it would be like Gabor Mate's work on ADHD and sort of being addiction is disconnection, and ADHD is not wanting to be in the present moment and distracting yourself from that present moment. You got to think a whole economy is based on attention. So pulling your attention 1 million different ways. Then you've got parents bringing up children, and the parents are very much under stress. So their attention is not necessarily on child rearing. It's going to be on potentially economic survival. There's all different childhood traumas that can develop from that. And then you can see how, you know, a form of ADHD is probably there in a lot of people on a spectrum, isn't it, James? And if you was to build a society to create that, you do well to beat the society that we've created already, wouldn't you, to create those type of symptoms?
Yeah.
Okay then, James. Good stuff. I could talk about this subject for
Possibly all day.
This is my bag. I love this
your
stuff.
bag, mate.
Yeah, this is the real truth of things. You watch the LinkedIn feed, you see all of these landing pages, squeeze pages,
game, isn't it?
scarcity.
It's all a game.
Only 5 spaces remaining. It's 997, manipulative psychology, all of the podcast commercialization, YouTube commercialization, creators are creating stuff that creates attention. The Mr. Beast, every second is manipulated.
Yeah.
The Bartletts, the businesses, the branding, it's all the same thing. I think it's stage 3 cancer.
I mean, we're all playing the game, aren't we? We're all in this situation where, you don't want to do the direct approach, because that's not the done thing. You can't actually say, look, I'm just trying to sell you some shit. I'm just trying to survive here. I've got to ask you how you are. I've got to, make some sort of comment about the post that you put out. So it sounds like I'm sort of interested and, that I understand you. And then maybe I'll do that a couple of times. And I go, oh, I've got this product that I'd like to sell you. And they go, well, I was kind of hoping that you just kind of liked me for me and that you were liking the content that I was putting out. Didn't really want you to sort of come in with trying to butter me up and then sell me some shit. I'd probably just prefer if somebody came to me and said, James, got this great thing. I'd like you to buy it. And I can either say yes or no, as opposed to, I think, that gray in your beard makes you look really distinguished. And that top you wore the other day, I thought, really showed off that sort of indentation in your shoulder quite well. And, that it looked quite defined. Yeah. And I'm like, well, just come out with it. But it's the bullshit.
Even then, there's a lot of people who criticize people on LinkedIn for doing that. And for me, I've got empathy for all people, even the people that are using those tactics, because, these are the standard, sales tactics, landing pages, email captures, all of those things are standard practices.
Just to move you through to the decision phase. It's like...
It's people trying to survive, James.
It's people trying to survive. But when you know, and that's the problem. When you know it, you know it.
Joseph said there's no scarcity, just manufacturing. You're right, James. The whole system is artificial scarcity. There is enough food to go round. We could build houses. There's enough energy.
Yeah.
We say about a finite planet, but we're living on an infinite universe. And if we waste so much, cyclical consumption, planned obsolescence of goods. So, Joseph, there is no truth. It is an artificial scarcity model, and there is more than enough. And people, living the simple life. I can't even, above a certain amount. I think you get to a point in life, James, where I can't even think of anything I really would want to buy. I don't want $1 million watch. I don't want a fancy car.
So I'm not going to name names or say about the situation, but in specifics. But there's a situation in an exhibition space that a lot of money has been spent on this particular space. And now it's come to light that for an electricity link up, there's another 10,000 required just to have electricity in this booth. And I'm like, well, let's not have electricity then. Let's just go to the basics and not be reliant on that. But it is just that situation of being held over because you quite like to have a TV there with a video playing. It's like, well, we don't need that. Let's just do the whole human interaction thing.
Yeah.
And so, but it's... And at what point do you go like, enough is enough? That really you've had enough now. Let's just be reasonable and say, I know there's overheads. I know there's cost of everything. But, once that's been covered, when is enough really enough that you think, well, actually, I can get away with another 10 grand here.
Yep.
So, you know, it is.
And it's like servicing services that really don't need to exist. I think a lot of people's jobs are basically those in that category. That it doesn't really need to exist. It's basically perpetuating a system of distraction and denial until technology eats itself, and then the dominoes fall. Let's say, you know, you automate a car, then all of a sudden the car insurance industry disappears, and all of a sudden potentially mechanics disappear because they'll go to a certain factory and be replaced. All of a sudden, you know, petrol and oil is not necessary.
And car ownership will be different anyway. People won't own
car ownership is a just inefficient way. So I guess the system does eventually eat itself. And like we said at the beginning, it's all so new and we're so primitive in our thinking. And it's just part of the evolution. It's happening. It seems slow when you're living in it, but when you sort of take a 10,000 foot view, it's fast.
Cool.
Okay, guys. Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Praveen. Thank you for watching. If you've got any questions, leave them in there, and then we'll carry on the conversation at a later date. You take care, James.
And you, mate. Always a pleasure.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye bye bye.